I have a roll call, please?
Mr. Eady? Mr. Carey? Mr. Glissman?
Yes.
Ms. Shanks?
Yes.
Mr. Wilbur?
Here.
Ms. Woodmeek?
Here.
Vice Chairwoman Brewster?
Here.
And Chairwoman Wright?
Here. I did get a text from Dave Carey that he is on his way, so. The next thing on the agenda is,
Motion to excuse
yeah,
the
sorry.
absent members. Helen?
So moved. Second.
roll call.
Mr. Glissman?
Yes.
Ms. Shanks?
Yes.
Mr. Wilbur?
Yes.
Ms. Woodmeek?
Yes.
Vice Chairwoman Brewster?
Yes.
Chairwoman Wright?
Yes. Now, we're looking at the approval of the motion summary for the meeting that was held October 23rd. It's included in your packet. Any discussion? Do I hear a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Roll call, please, or vote, please.
I lost my place, sorry. Mr. Glissman?
Yes.
Ms. Shanks?
Yes.
Mr. Wilbur?
Yes.
Ms. Woodmeek?
Yes.
Vice Chairwoman Brewster?
Yes.
Chairwoman Wright?
Yes. Next item on the agenda is public comments. We have no public here, so we will move on to the arborist report. Doug?
As you can see from the report, 27 trees pruned, 7 trees removed, and 7 trees were removed by us, 6 by the contractor, 7 stumps, 5 by the contractor, and we had 17 service requests. I have no other new issues.
I'm sorry.
I have no other.
Any questions for Doug or anything in the report? It was easy. The plan review now is included on this. Do you want to address that when we get to the plans, or how do you want to? Just-
No, it's just going to be kind of an update. So as we, like tonight, we have some plans to be approved.
Right.
So we'll be putting the dates in there.
Okay. Gotcha.
Just kind of running list. So we
Yeah.
can kind of keep it.
That's good. Okay.
I see, are there projects listed here for which we do not have plans tonight? For example, there is OWU 145 William Street. Whatever that package, that information was not included in our agenda, and I wonder if there's a plan tonight.
There's no building plans
Okay.
at the current time. It was a tree survey. They were taking down the house. I think they're doing just a parking lot
Yes.
currently. And the tree survey was submitted. They did a tree survey, and I went actually on site to make sure and did a caliper count, and it all matched.
Excellent. There were some major trees there, and they ended up saving only one large one. So I was wondering if a tree inventory had been done.
It was.
Good, excellent, appreciate that.
Anything else? Okay, next thing on the agenda, discussion of the zoning code. Mr. Eflin.
I'm here.
You're here? Got all the
All right.
big guns here tonight.
Good evening, guys. Haven't been before the Shade Tree Commission in a while, so it's good to see you all. I understand you've had some discussion about zoning code items and process and that sort of thing going on for a little while here. Sorry, I was absent. I think I'm supposed to be on your last agenda, but I was ill for a few days, so sorry about that. But I think we could probably, hopefully, conclude the discussion this evening. I know we included last time for you a memo describing kind of zoning 101, if you will, and the difference between base code and what we would call base code and plan developments. So hopefully that provided some information to you. And I think contained within that memo where Lance provided just some examples so you could kind of see as well how we make those distinctions and make those differences. I think tonight the only thing in listening to Ted and Doug and the rest of staff and watching a couple of or listening to the tapes of a couple of previous meetings with questions, the only other thing that I think I might add to try to round out the questions I've heard at any rate is that to know that the plan development base code's base code. It's just chapter 1168, but for plan developments where there may be lots of things we're talking about, and ultimately city council has to decide for all of us on design and buffers and buildings and materials and trees, perhaps alternative tree replacement schedules included in that as well. And it doesn't come out of the blue. We started this discussion, and Dave Carey guess is on his way, but I don't think any of you were on the Shade Tree Commission in 2008 when we had almost, I guess, 10 years ago now. We had started a discussion at that time with Shade Tree Commission and Planning Commission about perhaps updating the entire chapter of 1168. It was a different time, obviously, and right at, there was some conversation that had started and gone back and forth, some initial thoughts. We had done a lot of research and as staff and presented that back to the boards and commissions to get feedback. That we've got feedback from our development community as well. But we decided not to move forward with changes to the code, but we did have discussions about, you know, how can we encourage tree preservation and not just sort of ding you when you take a tree out. What about the tree fund, which has no dedicated revenue source and didn't have really any money in it at all at that time, except the allocated by city council during the normal budget process, but we still have street trees and other things to take care of. There's Dave. And I was just saying there was probably only one member of the commission that was here last time we talked about this, and I think it was you. But it was a decade ago, so I had to refresh my memory too. So but we did have a lot of those discussions about how can we do those sorts of things. And while for a lot of reasons we didn't end up changing the code, we did carry through some of those notions into the plan development districts that came forward in the last 10 years. And there you see these alternate replacement schedules, which really just can, the biggest part of those gives you some credit for preserving existing tree stands. You still have to replant, oftentimes there's a balance and you owe some money as well to make the complete accounting. But around, fall 2009, we had the Great Recession as well, and we kind of shelved lots of things during that time. So now we're going through, there was a genesis of thought there that occurred, not in a vacuum, but with kind of everybody thinking about how can we do these things. And at the time there was some thought, particularly from Shade Tree Commission, about maybe moving the tree preservation into the base code as well, which is something we may want to talk about. I know you've talked about that a little bit, and that's something that we may eventually want to talk about. So fast forward to today, I think the idea has been in our plan developments to be at, now these are unique sites with unique uses in unique arrangements. Some sites have trees, some sites don't have trees, it just depends on the site. But we've tried to be as consistent as we can with unique sites, if that makes sense, in those plan developments as we make recommendations to planning, as planning makes a recommendation to council, city council decides that for us, for you guys, for the community. And then it's our job, including you all, to implement those things. You do that through plan reviews and that sort of activity. So I think there's value in that consistency. We have some track record now on how has that worked in our real world. And I think in summary form, it's preserved stands of trees that might not have otherwise been preserved before, which is a good thing, I think. It's planted new trees. For sure. And it's provided some payment in lieu of and some funds to the tree fund. It doesn't have another dedicated revenue source, which is also something I think as a community we need to have that conversation a little bit about. Is there a way to have a dedicated revenue source for the tree fund? But maybe above my pay grade, but I think we should think about those things. I know Ted and Stacy and Doug would probably echo that sentiment as well. At this point, we're in the middle of a community comprehensive plan. Fast forward to today, as many of you know, and many of you have been involved in that, and hopefully you stay involved in that. The typical planning process would be to update a comprehensive plan and then look at the different regulations and codes and tools that we use to try to help implement that plan. One of which, a big one of which, is the zoning code, but there are others, depending on the subject. And so what I would anticipate is that we would hopefully conclude the comprehensive plan, which sets the policy framework in a lot of areas. I can't imagine much change in this community. I haven't heard much to date about, we don't want to preserve trees anymore or something like that. I think that's been a pretty consistent strain here in the community, that we want to continue to preserve trees and do lots of things. And there's some additional policy items I think we're going to look at. But then we would look at our implementation tools like the zoning code and probably come back and have a more in-depth discussion at that time with respect to, do we want to change the base code, and do we want to take some of these consistent replacement schedules that have been approved by council in the plan developments and put them in the base code? Do we want to make other changes? One of the things we found at that time, and it's even truer now, I can just tell you in my 25 years of experience in the business, tree preservation codes, ours is tough. It's tough, but most of them provide for some preservation credit. And so that is a pretty normal thing as you see other communities' codes. Not that we have to necessarily do what other communities do, but just so you know that. And so it might be an opportunity to look at that, but there might be other things we want to incentivize or change with respect to tree preservation as well, coming out of the comp plan. So I think that was the one last piece, and just some of the history. And Dave may remember some of this as well in those conversations. Before you came in, I was explaining that we had gone through 10 years ago the start of a potential code update, and we had done some work with Shade Tree, initial work, and we'd done some initial work with Planning Commission. I'm sure you recall that. And then we did even reach out for a little bit of input from the building association and from some of the developers, but it kind of, at that point, we were just heading into the Great Recession, and we just shelved the project at that point in time. So that kind of catches you up to my earlier work.
Yeah. I'm sure I saved those.
I'm sure you did. But I think that's probably worth looking at. I think other than that, I have Lance Schultz is with me here today. He's our planning and zoning administrator, if you haven't ever met him. Basically, I think I've been here since 2005, and I could tell you that I've been through a number of city arborists. I've been through a time when we didn't have a city arborist, which was very difficult, frankly, to try to administer this code. We rely on city arborists. Doug has been great from my perspective. He's been outstanding and a great resource. Ted and Stacy have been a great resource. And just like that one you were just talking about at 145 William, Doug went out there when we got the call from Wild Westland, this is what they want to do, and we contact Doug, and we work well back and forth in the department. Say, Doug, can you go take a look at this and just verify the information that they're providing us, so we're sure it's accurate and meets our code, and we can take an accounting of this, and then follow through with the next steps as well. So I think other than that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have or take any comments back that you may have in that regard, but I'll stop there.
I have a question, or I guess I'd like you to explain what happens in this process.
Okay.
I'm looking at the handout that we had last month, and it's sort of at the bottom of the second page. I don't know if
The memo?
got it. I'm sorry?
The memo?
Yes.
Is that what you're talking about?
It's the paragraph that starts in conclusion.
Okay.
Okay. and you go on to describe, enlarged projects can be very complex and time consuming, yada, yada. The applicant and the staff determine the tree replacement preservation requirements for each project. So I'm picturing a meeting where the developer is trying to minimize his or her costs.
Sure.
What's the city's typical objective at the other side of that, as you try to reach?
Sure, yeah. I mean, we usually start every, even initial concept meeting with developers. Could be a big development and complicated, could be simple, with a few standard kind of things. Some of them are engineering kind of things, some of them are standard planning kind of things. And what are the planning things that's standard for us is to go over the tree preservation code. Here's the base code, the chapter 1168. Kind of depends what they're looking to do. If they're looking to do a mixture of use, if they're thinking they want to do a planned development of some kind for whatever reason, then our normal course of events is to explain that this is the consistent kind of replacement schedule that has been approved by city council for at least 10 years or so now. And this is where we would start as a city because it's been approved and council's clearly been amenable to that. And then we have to get a lot more information normally from them to even begin to have any kind of discussion about caliper inches or is there a tree stand that could be preserved even on the site, as opposed to maybe just a farm break of trees or something like that. That's usually how those conversations start, and then they progress to the applicant providing a lot more information. It's certainly true that the developer is trying to minimize his cost in many respects. It might be, I don't want to put this material on a building. I want to do all vinyl or something, or I don't want to do this engineering requirement. I like to do that. But for the most part, applicants just want to know what what their options are for what they want to do and what the process is.
So then when you get to the point where you're discussing the tree preservation, they want to cut down trees and the city wants them not to cut down trees or wants to preserve. What is your objective? Just to meet the code, to keep as many trees, or to get as much money into the tree fund? How does that?
No, definitely not. We don't start by trying to get as much money in a tree fund, because we just explain, look, your options are typically we prefer you not to cut down a tree.
Right.
But
so that's your first priority.
But if you're or you have a site that's all trees and you want to develop it, we have to be reasonable as well. And we have to balance. Consistency also allows us to have some legal defensibility, which is important in zoning. Certainly in the tree preservation code, we've been sued on elements before, this being one of them, and we certainly don't want to run. We'd prefer not to lose one of those kinds of cases. So we want to be reasonable, we want to be defensible, and part of that is being consistent as well. So we typically will say we prefer you not to cut down the trees, but if you're going to do that, you have under either of those, base code or an alternate schedule, you kind of have three options. You can replant on site, you can replant on another site, or you can make a payment in lieu of, or you can do a combination of all three to make however your pro forma works to make it work for you. A lot of times in a big development, we're also balancing things like additional buffering above and beyond what's required of base code. And that buffering isn't usually just a mound of dirt. It's, a mound of dirt with some landscaping on top, some trees on top. And it comes in different forms. You guys have seen the plans as they come through, I think. So that's usually where we start. And, of course, we can't guarantee what city council is going to approve in any particular situation. Now, plan developments are complicated. They have a lot of moving parts that council ultimately has to make those decisions on. Sometimes trees are one of those, sometimes they're not. The Belmont Place subdivision is a plan development. There's very few trees on the site. It's just farmland. But it still has that schedule in there because it does have a few trees. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does.
Okay.
I have a couple, I think.
Yeah.
Right. So there's if I remember this right, there's a planned mixed use, right? Which is what we're talking about primarily, right? And then there's also a equivalency provision route, and then there's base code. You're talking about alternate schedules. How many alternate schedules are there? Because it seems to me that two of these are prescriptive, right? One of them is a planned mixed use is kind of prescriptive in what's going on. The other is the base code, which is kind of prescriptive.
Yeah.
So how many options are there?
So I think you're right. I tend to agree with you. I mean, a planned mixed use overlay or a planned development, we call them planned mixed use overlays. Now, the previous version of the code called them planned unit developments, which we still have, and we still have to administer this. So you'll hear me use those terms essentially interchangeably. And we have base code. And I think those, because of the consistency we've had in we as a city have had city council with planned mixed use overlays or planned developments, I think those are fairly prescriptive. I tend to agree with you. Base code is obviously prescriptive. So then you have sort of that third option that you were talking about. Someone could, I guess, theoretically make an application for a variance to any part of the zoning code, for example. That goes to the Board of Zoning Appeals. So they could appeal something in the base code relative to trees. I can't recall ever having one of those brought forward in my time here. So none, I guess, of those. There was one kind of hybrid approach that was used with the city schools maybe a couple years ago when they were preserving the area, and we kind of took a planned development approach to that, where they were actually over preserving an area of trees behind Dempsey, and putting a permanent easement on there as well. That's really the key, I think, to those preservation zones, is you have areas where you have a permanent easement placed over them.
Is that typically something that happens when these?
Oh yeah, now that normally doesn't happen until the end of the process. Obviously, you see these in process, I think, generally. So you might see a preliminary plan, a final plan. In the case of applying a planned mixed use overlay, that's the zoning component of it that may even come before those other two pieces. Usually that comes with a preliminary plan. But then there's details that come in a final plan. And then we go away from kind of you guys and boards and commissions and council, and we have to then administer what those decisions were as they come in with building permits. And in some cases, like these large PUDs, we have to track all kinds of things. Design elements to tree replacement in accordance with the schedule that was approved. And that's why we try to encourage applicants to do the count up front and have it in the zoning, so that not only they know what, they're responsible, what the deal is for themselves, but so we know when we go to administer this, there's not a question. And I can tell you, looking back at some old cases, pre-05, that it wasn't always as clear as maybe we had hoped, and maybe I'd like to think as we do today. Of course, somebody might be sitting in my seat 10 years and go, well, they weren't as clear as they thought they were, or something like that. But so I think there's been very few of the kind of the third option there.
Right. How much of the second option, the plan use?
Most in the last 10 years, most of our development plan, most of our rezonings have been to planned developments. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but it's been, and a lot of them have not been adding to the development pipeline per se. They've been developers re-looking at things that were already in the pipeline, or pieces of ground that were already in the pipeline, and looking to do things like mixing uses, and things that just 15 years ago they thought, well, I'll just knock out 400 of the same house or something like that. So ultimately, I think from a development director perspective, good thing. They want to mix uses and do some different things. And maybe they want to cluster a development. We had a couple apartment complexes come forward. One was approved, one wasn't here recently. One of them would have clustered the development in a part of the site that would have avoided the stand of trees, or largely, not completely, but largely avoided the stand of trees. That was the one that wasn't approved by council. But by clustering the development in the open portion of this, a more open portion of the site, you could preserve this stand of trees in the back. And the applicant themselves brought forward a sort of a second option, which said, well, we don't have to do that. We could just go in your code allows us to take out all the trees. We just have to replant or pay or do some combination of that. Again, that wasn't approved by council anyway. And it wasn't just a tree issue. It was traffic and it was design and I think it was clustering and it was, probably the tree component was maybe one of the more palatable things, although we never really kind of got to that level of the discussion with that one. So I think most of them, and I think that's coming out of our, what will be our new comprehensive plan and maybe a new zoning code. I think it's probably time. Our zoning code's getting pretty long in the teeth in a lot of respects. And it doesn't allow you to do things in base code like mixed uses and cluster developments and do other things that are fairly commonplace techniques in zoning now. What communities are wanting in many respects, and I suspect that we do as well, given how we've reacted to some of these that have come before us as a community and city council. So it may be that we want to relook at our zoning code and maybe provide an opportunity to go through some of those kinds of things in more a base code situation that rather than have everything have to be a zone change, that kind of thing. And so certainly the tree preservation code would become that's something we would have to look at that time to make sure that it's going to produce the results that we all want with respect to the policy guidance.
So it sounds like that more and more people are going to mixed use with the land that they have.
I think so.
And that
Yeah.
puts us into this alternate schedule more and more.
Yeah, I think so.
And I guess the thing that maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, that we were surprised about as a commission is that we don't know which path plans are on when we see them necessarily. And we're just taking it on faith that, well, we know that Doug is.
Yeah, that we're all
or the
doing our
arborists
job.
Are doing the inventory piece,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
But we're not seeing the math that says, okay, this is how this inventory translates into
Right.
what's going into the tree
We're only
fund.
seeing the
And
end
so
product,
we're-
we're seeing the on paper.
Right,
We're seeing
right.
it.
Well, that's your,
We're seeing
it's kind of your
phase
position
one
in the
and
process,
phase
the
three
overall
and phase
process.
two is a mystery.
Yeah. In part, I think we do a much better job than even when I started here of trying to document those things in our staff report as they don't come to you, they come to planning commission and council.
Right.
But they're available to Tom sits in on almost all those meetings, so they're available to anyone to take a look at and certainly to comment on if you had comments through that part of the process. But one of the things I haven't looked at, I think Doug had a kind of a summary sheet that you've been changing some of the way that you're getting reported
We're just starting
information.
that. Yeah, we're just starting
I
that.
think, yeah, so one of the things we could do is also add, is this a base code? Is this a plan development that's been approved? Maybe what were the ordinance numbers or whatever you think might help you in regard to the information piece that you want, so that when you see it, you'll know this is a 145 East William was a base code situation, Terra Alta is a giant plan development situation. And we could provide any of that kind of information once it's approved by council that, if it's a base code, that's obvious, we can provide that. Maybe that'd be a way to do that. I don't know what you think. Everybody's quiet back behind.
They're like, oh, more work. for
Nobody
us.
joined me up here, I noticed, and everybody's quiet.
Would that be after the fact of the initial plan review?
Yeah, I think in part we have to do an initial review just to make that determination. Applicant has to decide which of many paths, trees being one of them, they want to go down. And then they have to go down in many cases, conditional use or rezoning or development plan review process, or potentially, I guess, a variance process or something like that.
Dave, in your narrative tonight, you've used the word consistency. When you're talking about, you look to try to be consistent.
And we try.
Yeah, so flesh that out a little bit. I know what the word consistency means, but over time or like developments or exactly what?
I think both. I think
Oh.
over time, I think we try to be, again, consistent in plan developments are unique by definition. They're unique pieces of property. They're unique mixtures of uses. And so it's harder to be consistent in those inconsistent situations, those unique situations. But with respect to the replacement schedule, I think Lance's memo was good in that it gave you kind of the an example down at the bottom with, I guess, River Street, but the basis of sort of the good, fair, poor determinations, and Doug helps us out with, determining those. I wouldn't pretend to be able to tell you what those would be. That's why we have an arborist. And the idea that you can get credit, I mean, there's a debit side, how many trees are you taking out, how many caliper inches do those equal? And there could be a credit side then of, in the same schedule, based in the ones that you might be permanently preserving, on the credit side as well. And we normally tell applicants you should at least, and this is coming out of that 08 discussion, you should at least try to be, no more than 50-50. You should at least try to balance those things. If not, come out to the good, kind of like Dempsey, come out to the good. Between that preservation, a payment in lieu of, and all the additional planting that doesn't actually count as credit toward, and this is one of the things we hear from the development community. I plant all these street trees, which is your domain. I have to plant some, maybe front yard trees or some other landscaping trees, but I get no tree planting credit for that. It's those things I have to do. And our response today under the code or under a PUD code is, that's right, you don't. Those are just things you have to do.
Well, you have to put a roof on a house too.
I understand. Again, I would say many codes, many other cities' codes might give credit for this. Maybe not street trees. That's where you start to see some of the differences. So maybe street trees aren't, but maybe other on-site trees that might be required are. That's sort of down in this detail for tonight's discussion. But those are the kinds of things I think if we finish the comprehensive plan and we go into the zoning code update, those are the kind of details we're going to have much more discussion about.
Has that had a major negative impact on us? That they say, well, they have to do more than what's expected?
It definitely has created some situations where, it could place us in some legal entanglements as a community overall with respect to that. If we were not consistent, we were not reasonable, ultimately a court would have to find those things. One of my jobs is to keep us out of those entanglements if we can as a community. And that's one of the things you pay us to do, to be experts in that regard for you and for city council. I think, it's clearly been working and functional. We have no lack of growth in our community. That's for a lot of reasons. We're a great community, so why not grow? Why not be here, develop? But I think by and large, for the last 10 years, that's proved its merit in that it's working pretty well, I think, to preserve trees and provide an incentive to do that. And I think the development community is receptive to that idea, but also obviously planting and making payments in lieu of. One of the things that is also difficult, I think, for the development community is to make a large cash payment for something like trees as it would be for sewer pipes or siding or something like that, all right up front, when the development might take 5-10 years to build out. Now, not every site is cleared all at once either, so there's a balance there. So sometimes we try to find ways to say, well, okay, if it's a housing development, you can pay as you pull building permits, because you have to pull one. We're in charge of that process, and we can monitor it as something comes in that you have to make a payment. Terra Alta, for example, will have to make a payment, I think, of $500 a single-family house, in addition to planting more trees, in addition to the preservation that they had to do as well. So, but in exchange for that, they were allowed to take some trees out to be able to do the development.
You were discussing some of the finer details that, eventually would probably have to pay more attention to, but one of the ones you brought up, these making the plans in the beginning. You have options to replace the tree bank, fund, things of that nature, on-site replacement. And there's all these rules about if the trees are taken down because they're in the way of a building or they're damaged or diseased. But then there's the after effect of construction. For example, damage inflicted to the root system, to machinery or
Yes.
compaction or asphalt. Do we make a big fuss of that, or is that just a simple after the fact, okay, well, these trees were damaged, now you're gonna
Yeah.
have to go through any of these three
Yeah.
or a
It's a
combination,
great question.
as opposed to above and beyond,
Yeah.
because you didn't take necessary precautions to save something worse.
It's a great question. We had that dialogue back in '08 a little bit about, do you use the snow fence and protect the drip line during construction, that sort of thing. And there are other ways to do that as well
Sure.
today. We did not move to put that into really either base code or into the PUDs at this point. However, we have started to think about that. And where you have areas, for instance, in a PUD where you're doing permanent preservation, if during construction, we don't really have a time period we've arrived at, like after a year or something, if a tree dies, does it still count? And that was one of your questions. We won't really have a look back period like that too. That's probably something we want to talk about. We probably want to get a little more formal in how you do that protection during construction as well. And that would help our inspectors to know what to inspect. But it may be a little look back period. It gets a little hard. I mean, why did that tree die in a year or two is sometimes hard to determine. Sometimes you've exposed the edge of a tree row that never was exposed, and that, just the act of doing that, whether you protected the root zone or not, that tree might have died. But there are standards and practices during construction.
You can come out and go,
Yeah.
that 20-foot, soil
Yeah.
pile next to those
Yeah,
preserved
it's not
trees
good.
is probably a bad idea, as opposed to after the fact, which is, I think,
Yeah.
really more of what
We're
I
trying
would
to,
desire to.
I agree.
see
I
happen
tend to agree.
enforcing during construction.
We're trying to be more proactive in that. We do have some capacity limitations, just how many staff we have to do this sort of thing. I'd feel much more comfortable if we had some, codified regulations with respect to that, and I would look to do that with, an update of the basic chapter. I think we tried to do some of that out of Trepless,
Yeah, that's the example I was gonna bring up. I brought that up.
which is better than nothing.
Big oak tree in the middle that they were
Yeah.
trying to save. They haven't really started construction yet out there. But
Yeah.
they tried to kind of do a drip line preservation area, which was a little bit too small. So
Yeah.
I mentioned it to Dave already, and Dave was gonna talk to, mention to them that, they may want to widen that out.
And I can't remember, but that tree may be one that's on their preservation docket. I think we've let them know in that case, to your point, we've let them know, look, that is a tree sitting right there out in the open. You put a fence around it yourself, Mr. Developer. If that thing dies, then we're not going to give you credit for that. So you're going to have to plan or pay or whatever it is.
I mean, I see in construction, it just infuriates me to no end when you go, there's so many things that we have set, whether it's any type of zoning, storm drains, you've got these things to cover these drains so that all this silt and sand is not running and they're all clogged. And, one of the local elementary schools was being remodeled and the kids could never cross the street when it rained because none of the construction guys ever maintained that sewer barrier during construction. So then you'd have to come out, scrape it all out, then it all just runs down the sewer with the water. So I guess what I'm getting at is maybe it's something we as a commission need to address during construction. There's only so many trees.
And that's the thing. There are good models and standards out there for that sort of thing now. So I don't think that level of effort in terms of code is,
This would be a good time to,
in terms of a code and a process is that hard. I think we probably would need to change the code, certainly maybe that part of how we administer it collectively and figure out who would inspect that sort of thing.
Right.
What kind of penalties there may be and that kind of stuff. So,
I believe that we, as a commission, did recommend that as an amendment at some point here relatively recently, right?
Yeah, when we were reviewing,
Yeah, we have that language, but it just hasn't been updated in the ordinance yet. That's
Well,
another
and
process.
council has to approve it, right?
Right, exactly.
Right now, we're in this we're in a little bit of a weird period in that it's hard for me to recommend any major changes to our implementing tools like the zoning code while we're right in the middle of a community conversation about our goals, policies, and objectives in our comprehensive plan. Typically, unless there's some emergency, and I guess by definition, there shouldn't be a planning emergency, but there are from time to time. I really would recommend that we all go through that. We have a lot of work and effort as a community. We've changed a lot since the last plan in a lot of ways. And then I think we need to really look at our tools, our implementation tools, and that would be one of them. It's not to say that in the meantime we're not doing things like the Trepless tree example.
Right.
It's certainly not going to be perfect, and it's not a standard. If the developer were to say, well, how, I don't, what's your regulation for making me even put a fence around that? We don't have one right now. But that's okay. Just tell them, because you should do this. We do try to do things like that. And we spend a lot of time and effort and energy on it, and particularly trees. They're important to our community. They're captured in our current comprehensive plan as being important to our community. I wish there were a perfect set of construction time regulation and guidelines. I haven't seen them yet. There's just no, construction sites are messy and difficult, and what you're talking about before in turn, those are called dandy bags. Those are actually required to be over the storm sewers so that silt doesn't get down in them. But they pond water up.
Right, if they're not cleaned off and maintained, just like anything else on a construction site, it's a lot to handle, I get it.
Yeah.
But I've been in the construction industry and in the landscape industry, and there's a lot of
There's a lot of moving parts during
and there's
that
a lot of
process.
time frames, where tick,
Yeah.
tick, tick, we got to get down the line. So I do think it does need to be addressed when we deal with it.
Yeah. I don't disagree with you.
Yeah, thanks.
Any other questions?
Yes, of course. Let me tell you where I'm coming from. For as long as I've served on this commission, which is probably 8 to 10 years by now, Chapter 1168, tree preservation regulations, has been our gospel. That was the law of the land, and we abided by it. Occasionally, we made exceptions as permitted we exercise discretion as permitted by Section 1168, 11. But this has been our gospel. Allow me to quote a few sentences. 1168:04, in all zoning districts, no exception, all major trees, no exception, shall be preserved and or replaced in compliance with the provisions of this chapter unless exempted herein. 1168:07 says the intent of this section is to maintain an equivalent tree canopy citywide before and after removal / construction. 1168:11 wants to assure that the objectives of this chapter and the proposed development are best satisfied. I was surprised to hear tonight David Efland refer to 1168 as quote-unquote the base code. I've not heard the term in 8 years. The term suggests to me that the base code is what it says, the basis. It can be superseded. It is not the law of the land. It is effectively null and void in light of other, maybe not null and void, that's an exaggeration, but it can be replaced and displaced and superseded by other compelling factors. And I carefully read through the memo that Lan Schultz provided. He referred to Section 1147:05. The development plan review criteria. There are 19 items. I went through them. One of them, N as in North Pole. Talks about mature stands of trees, individual trees of substantial age or size. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I deal a lot with executive questions, concerns, interpretations at Ohio Wesleyan. This section N does not say that credit shall be given for tree preservation. It simply is one of 19 factors to be considered for plan review, including like air pollution and sewer systems, etc., etc. None of the other items would credit. There's no credit, for this or that. So why is N an exception? I don't see it. The way I read it, from a legal or paralegal point of view, I do not see that this section even allows for the possibility of tree preservation. I do not see how they are connected at all. So after reading Lance's memo, I'm as puzzled as before. Yeah, maybe I should stop here and allow David to maybe address that. But I'm now, as before, I'm not convinced that what the city is doing has a basis in fact in documents. Now, maybe quite possibly, City Council will someday overrule that. Will come up with new rules and regulations, and I fully expect them to do that. In light of various things that I won't talk about now, but at the moment, Section 1168, in my mind, continues to be the law of the land, and that is the one and only guidance for Shade Tree Commission, and it should be the only guidance for Shade Tree Commission, unless it is superseded by orders from above. We have yet to see new documentation, a new chapter, new rules and regulations, a new law. So we are changing the rules, we are changing the law, we are changing the regulations, and the Shade Tree Commission has been blindsided by that, quite frankly. Terms like base coat and tree preservation came totally out of the blue for us. We were not familiar with that. We had not talked about that in years. So I'll stop right there for now.
Well, I'm not sure exactly how to address those wide-ranging comments, Mr. Walberg. What I would say, I would find it amazing that you're blindsided by that, given the fact that what we've been doing is setting about for 10 years the implementation of the start of a discussion that included the Shade Tree Commission. You may not have been on it at the time. I can't help that.
Could be.
So I've given you the background. Whether you choose to just reject that or incorporate it into the thinking is ultimately going to be up to you. What I could tell you is that since the 1960s in the United States, plan developments have been a well-settled matter in the courts of land use law and in zoning doctrine. So these are very normal things and customary things for not only us in the profession, but the community. And beyond just sort of giving you a degree in planning and making you a certified planner and understanding that level of detail, which is kind of what you pay us to do, okay? I don't know how else we could provide information in that regard. So I think by and large, the commissions, be it planning or certainly city council, and I do think Shade Tree Commission as well, and by some of your questions and head nods tonight, is understanding of those processes. I'm more than happy to have the city attorney produce a memo for you that says the city can engage in planned mixed use overlays, and that can adjust some of the zoning code requirements and even other requirements of the city if the city council obviously passes one of those, which they don't do all the time. The apartment complex being a good example here recently where they just didn't approve that for a variety of reasons. So we do have the legal basis and legal authority to do that.
Well, the Shade Tree Commission serves in an advisory capacity. I'm fully aware of that. Not more, not less. But it would be welcome, it would be desirable from my point of view, if the actual practice were reflected in what you refer to as the base code. It is not reflected in chapter 1168. The language, of the law is not aligned with the actual practice, and that irks me.
Well, Mr. Albright, let me interrupt for a second. I think you don't understand that when City Council passes a planned mixed-use overlay or a planned development, that is the law of the land for that development. So in my opinion, it's not going against the law of the land. It's not a different, it's the law of the land for that development. That is part of the point of a planned development on that piece of property as defined by our city council. So just on that point, it is the law. I would disagree with you. It is the law of the land. Now, if we wanted to make preservation credit the law of the land for anybody, regardless of whether they're going through a planned development process or a rezoning process or not, that's something that we certainly can talk about. We did back in 08. I think I spent a lot of time tonight remarking on the fact that that may be a process we want to go through in the future. We may decide that we don't want to do that, but we should do that in the context of our goals, objectives, and policies as a community. It may be the city council passes a comprehensive plan, a new one that says, we don't want any more tree preservation, period. I don't think so, but it could be. It may be we want to double tree preservation. Again, I don't think so. It may be we want to find that balance between tree preservation and development and sort of do everything and maybe do some things better, protection during construction and that sort of thing. That would be what I probably would anticipate at this point in time, but it's hard to know until we conclude that process. And then we would need to get our tools aligned to be able to implement that. Zoning code is nothing more than an implementation tool for that, but it is there are different options available under a zoning code, even in different zoning districts have different requirements. What you're suggesting is that everything should be the same everywhere. It just isn't. And it doesn't need to be, in my opinion. It needs to be consistently administered, but we also have to be understanding that there are situations that require some flexibility. In fact, the base code in 1168 ends with a section on flexibility. Yes. The landscape chapter ends in a section on flexibility. I believe there's sections in 900 in the codified ordinances that reflect trees and other things that talk about flexibility. That's a difficult word for you. That's a difficult word for me. What does that mean?
Well, we've always
that's a difficult word.
Minor changes should be possible.
Okay, but that's not in the code either. But there's no definition of what is flexibility in the code either. You just gave one, but I mean, so I think to the extent that when we're in a planned development district and we have a schedule and it's there for review and it's there for comment by everybody, be you included if you don't like those or you want them to change, and ultimately adoption or not by city council, that's really as transparent as we can be in that process. I don't know how to be any more transparent in that process.
Well, one of the plans tonight is the River Street Business Park. City Council has already approved that, fully approved that. Yeah, that's great. However, and the developer is getting tree preservation credit, for that. There is a total of 510 caliber inches on the property, 350. That's information is on page 2, and also a part of the plan review tonight. 510 total. The developer is removing 351 of those caliber inches. But the developer does not have to replace them all. Now, chapter 1168 clearly says all 351 caliber inch trees must be replaced to maintain or tree bank or tree fund or whatever, the equivalent in lieu of. But the objective is to maintain the tree canopy in the city of Delaware. Chapter 1161 does not permit a tree preservation credit the way I interpret the document. And maybe we agree that we disagree. Maybe 1168 needs to be revised, needs to be changed, needs to be updated to reflect the actual practice. I do not see that that our gospel, what you refer to as somewhat dismissively as the base code, permits.
I don't refer to that. I'm sorry, I don't refer to that dismissively at all. I mean, I don't mind disagreeing, but don't put words in my mouth.
Okay.
Thanks.
We used to do a base code.
Base code is not
It
a
has a lot of implications.
well, and maybe for you, but for a practicing planner, that is not a dismissive term, but all that simply, it's simply saying like the R3 is a base code in the city of Delaware.
Yes,
It carries no value judgment to it.
All right.
I will say with respect to the River Street Park, I mean, I don't have that in front of me, guys. So I don't have the schedule in front of me. So I mean, go back, maybe it's in front of you and you could read it, but there is an amount that was a heavily treed site.
Yes.
There's an amount of preservation, there's an amount of removal, and there was, I believe, a payment in lieu of as well required with respect to that too. So again, I think that's an example where, and it was on that consistent, good, fair, poor schedule. So again, I think submit that's pretty consistent for that particular development site, which is a pretty unique piece of property.
Yeah.
Which also includes two, what we would call paper alleys. No value judgment in that either. That's just what we call them, which are streets or right-of-ways which are dedicated. They're literally on a plat map, but they're not out there in the real world built, that run through the middle of this individual site. Part of those approvals by city council was to vacate those alleyways, those paper alleyways as well. They had trees on top. So there's a lot of moving parts for just that.
Yeah.
It's actually a relatively small development there.
I personally feel that
Sure.
$20,000 into the tree fund and saving whatever is a pretty flexible arrangement for that side.
Yeah, and I think I definitely support that. I think it allows that site to be developed, not certainly not at no cost. This is not a big developer. This is a small, local, goes to St. Mary's Church right here, developer who is trying to make use of his property and still comply and be consistent with our codes and provide some other economic development opportunities for businesses in our community as well, in addition to his. So I thought that was a good decision by city council and a balance of all of those kinds of things they had to wrestle with.
Tom, do you have any other questions on a different topic related to this?
Not really. It's a decision, that Shade Tree, this particular project is a decision that Shade Tree Commission has to abide by. However, for the record, I would like to state that it is in violation of our primary goal, which is to maintain the tree canopy within the city of Delaware. That is not being done with that particular project and a dozen other projects, over the past couple of years. Ever since Dempsey, the Dempsey development, which I remember well, there has been a proliferation, of tree preservation projects to the detriment of the tree canopy within the city of Delaware.
Yeah, we're definitely going to have to agree to disagree on it, because what I see is permanent preservation of a tree canopy, so mature trees, by and large, more mature trees. Implementation, planting of new trees, and often payment in lieu of. So a combination of those three things, which is allowed in base code, let alone plan development code. And overall, then we have a canopy that's mature instead of taking all of those out and replacing them with tiny little trees that in 50 years might grow. And we have new trees that will mature, hopefully, into large trees, and a payment into the tree fund. So I think we've actually done exactly what the chapter says in terms of maintaining the tree canopy, and that is not the only goal and objective of the tree preservation code and chapter, as you know, but it did serve to balance those things, preserve tree canopy, and actually grow the tree canopy with the new plantings over time.
And desirable species.
And desirable species, right? We had this entire discussion in 2008 with respect to the emerald ash borer, which had just come forward at that time and was wiping out that species of tree. We had a Department of Natural Resources in the state that was mandating that the trees be taken down. I thought a little prematurely. That was my own personal opinion. But that was, that was the mandate. And so you'll see in a lot of our plan developments to be consistent again, take those out, take them out, take out the ash trees. So, and I'm sure there'll be another bug or disease or, there was Dutch elm way back and then there'll be something else that we don't know about.
Tom,
If there's
did
anything
you
else
have
I
any
can
questions?
answer.
You didn't have any questions? Anybody else questions?
I have, well, mostly comments, I think, but if you'd allow me a couple minutes.
Yes.
Okay, so I understand Tom's sentiment, I must say, because I was unaware that this planned mixed use provision was being used so frequently, and when new members come on, I believe we try to give them the base code, which is our tree planting codes, as sort of their education piece. This is kind of what we do. This is our context from which we work, right? It seems to me that there's another context which we need to be aware of, that we just typically are not. I mean, I'm not a student of council. I'm not necessarily, I'm half a student of planning, but not really, right? This is a volunteer commission. We all got jobs, we all got families, all that stuff. So, and we're more focused on outreach than holding folks to the letter of code. I mean, that's sort of council and planning and all of that, right? But with respect to maintaining canopy and maintaining what the city has already and trading some of that out for other benefits in a planned use, right? So that's all equations that are a little mysterious to us, of course. I mean, you've tried to explain some of them, but it's a case by case, right? What happened with Emerald Ash Borer is EAB came in at kind of a bad time for the city because it came in during an economic crash too. So we didn't have much buffer to deal with. And so we spent, many, many years digging out of that. A lot of it was just tree removal costs and whatnot. And, the tree fund was gone, like in a year, just in tree removals, right? And then it took, people were on waiting lists for years and years and years to get their street trees replaced, which is
Because we had ash
Shade Tree
trees.
Commission. Yeah, we had ash trees on the street and we were removing things. We just didn't have money to replace them. And so they're, sorry, 5 years unless you want to pay for it yourself, right? If I'm not in favor of spending the tree fund down because of that, there will be another. God help us if it's maple, right? So either, and city council helped us out and base funding to help dig us out of that hole. And I guess that's maybe without a robust tree fund and an independent way to do that, a curb front assessment. I mean, that's the way a lot of cities do it to fund a tree program is a curb frontage assessment, something like that. You need a robust pile of cash to deal with these kinds of things. Tornadoes, whatever. We do a good job with hazard trees in the city, so probably not for city trees, but there's a bunch of stuff. So I don't want to give away the farm because, we know it's going to come. So that's my perspective on it. So I don't want to use that pile of cash as an excuse not to do the right thing.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Staff comments section of the agenda. Doug, you've already given your report, but maybe Ted's got something to say.
I did not have anything new. I just keep with the Arborist report, if you have any other comments, this is something still new, so if you have any comments or tweaks we can do to it, let us know, please.
Maybe it's just you and I that discussed the strategic plan, but do you have an update on that?
Yeah, that's still something we're working on.
Okay.
I think we're gonna get to a point where we want to submit a draft plan for the board here. and,
Okay.
Move forward with that. So-
Okay. Stacy, anything?
That's all good.
Okay. Member comments. Start down with Tom's end of the table.
I'm good.
I would like to send out tree inventory files to people. Whoever wants to volunteer to do the online tree canopy assessments. So we have ward maps now. We have it set up in ward maps.
Okay.
So the idea would be one of 4 people crank out the inventory samplings for those wards. And then we combine the numbers, average them out in the end. Just a little bit of algebra,
Okay.
the bigs.
I'm already
So
terrified.
volunteers for, no, it's
Math involved?
It's easy math. It really is. It's really easy math. So basically all you do is you have this little web application and it has a little hash mark and you look and see what's on that hash mark as far as what's on that map. And you click the right category from the little drop-down radio button and move on to the next one. So volunteers.
Yeah, I'll do something. I don't
Who's
know.
gonna do,
What, you have a timeline that you're like,
Yeah.
you know, and talk
Ted, do we have a timeline?
like January, February?
I don't want to be pushy on that, but how soon what do you think is a reasonable timeline?
Oh, well,
I'd like to include it in the tree management plan too, I guess. Is that information great for that? So,
yeah. So when is that? When are you wanting to put that
I
together?
was hoping early 2019.
Yeah.
Our
We can
next
have,
meeting
we can
will,
have a goal of
the
say
January meeting.
January 10th.
Okay.
We'll send the results by January 10th and I'll compile. How
Okay.
about that? And at some point I'll have a target number of inventory sampling, something close to 1,000 maybe. You could probably do it in a couple hours if you really sat down and just cranked it out. It might take a little longer than that, but you know, it's something you could do while you're watching TV or
Okay.
half listening to something else. There's a lot of Christmas programs coming up.
You just do it at home.
I'm kidding. Yeah,
Oh, okay.
yeah, it's a web
Yeah.
application.
Oh.
Yeah.
Maybe come in for that, yeah.
There's only like a handful of them.
I was kind of, I guess, thinking, actually, not that walking around.
No, you're sitting in the chair, man.
No.
It's all right.
Yeah,
All right,
I'll
so
send
I've
me
got
one or two. I
Susan,
don't know.
Tom, I'll do one.
Is this something
One
you
more.
do on a mobile device? Or do you need a
I've-
laptop?
I don't
I've
have
only done it on a
enough
PC, but-
understanding of what we're doing.
Okay, so,
Sorry.
well, no, that's okay.
We're realtors here.
So there's so you're familiar with maps and aerial photos, right?
Yeah,
So
yes.
what this program does is it picks arbitrarily within a defined area. So you have Ward 3, for example. So you have a map. Ward 3, it'll only pick spots within Ward 3. On a map, it's a Google satellite image, right? And you look at that, you can zoom in, you can zoom out for context to determine what is it? Is it turf? Is it a tree? Canopy? Is it a road? Is it a lake? You know, so there'll be a few categories. I think there's like 8 options.
And if
that
it's
you can
canopy, do you have to pick a percent or it's just yes or no?
No, it's
For
just
everyone,
yes or
it's
no
just-
for
okay.
every point.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
It's this, or
Okay.
this for every
You're
point.
categorizing, yeah.
And so the one thing you got to be aware of though is that it's 3-dimensional space. So tree canopy is yes or no, regardless of whether it's over a sidewalk or turf or whatever
Gotcha.
else. So we're going to be undersampling things like sidewalks. So it's not accurate for everything,
Yeah.
but
That's accurate.
tree canopy yes or no is all right. And then it kind of gives us an idea of everything else.
I'll do it.
All right. Awesome. Thank you.
Stupid question. I'm not familiar with that, software. Would it make a difference if you did a tree canopy assessment in the summer or the winter? I would imagine, more leaves on trees gives you better data. Or am I incorrect?
Well, it depends on what you want to do with it, but more leaves on trees is not bad. The satellites are typically done in the winter so that you can
Okay.
see what's under them.
Okay.
So it's a judgment call. A little bit at a time. Most of the time it's pretty clear. You know, that's why we do, 1,000, 2,000, whatever, how many samplings. And it kind of comes out in the wash. And we'll know from looking at each of them if there's drastic differences that you don't see on the broad satellite image, then we'll have to reconvene and see if someone's interpretation is drastically different than somebody else's, but I think we'll be all right.
I've messed around with that iTree program. It's not, the mapping is really good on it as far as your imagery.
It is.
So
Yeah.
you can tell it's tree pretty easily.
Tree, telephone pole.
Okay,
Oh,
you got your,
Yeah, you can tell if it's berm or road too. I mean, it's good.
Okay.
What's the purpose? Just outside, obviously, the information, just,
Yeah, we kind of want to get a glimpse of our tree canopy within the city.
okay.
And Ted might be able to expand more on that, but as to what that could be used for. But it's a benchmark to compare other cities and maybe it could roll into some zoning. I don't know.
But it's also a benchmark, like for us to kind of have it, see where we're at.
Yeah.
And where we want to go.
it's a different number besides counting the number of trees you have. You know,
Yeah.
There's a goal, I don't know, 30% or 33%, it seems to me, was the sort of the global goal for a
They
city.
shied away from that though now.
Have they?
Every city's different for the most part.
Okay.
Right? So I think you're kind of supposed to set your own goals, like where you want to
Okay.
be. Where each city has its, you can't set a national, like every city should have, this much coverage.
Right.
It's kind of different. I guess we see where we're at and see where we want to be. It would be some of the goals of that.
Do you have enough volunteers now?
Yes.
You okay? Anything else?
Mhm.
Okay, Tom?
One statement, one question. The city is working on its 2019 budget, of course. We're in the midst of budget discussions. Our balance in the tree fund as of the end of 2018 is $216,000 and $317. So 260,000 roughly. Developer tree fees were down this year. Only $7,100 came in. Perhaps, maybe I shouldn't say that, in part of policy changes, that have been instituted. So we have to watch that. Expenditures, $50,000 are allotted for to the Parks Fund this year and also next year, 18 and 19. And there is $19,000 for tree purchases this year. $15,000 have been allocated for next year. So the fund balance is good. We have the equivalent of 3 years of money in the current tree fund. That should sustain us for quite some time. Anybody wants to see the numbers?
One thing I'll add to that is I wouldn't look for a consistent number to be deposited in that tree fund each year. That number is up and down. You can't pinpoint a consistent number to say that like we're going to get 20,000 this fund every year. It's very up and down. Some years we'll get 100,000, some years we'll get 7,000. So it's very up and down. But I think like Carrie pointed out earlier, our goal is to make sure we don't deplete that fund. We keep a healthy fund intact.
Well, along with that too, as Mr. Eflin stated earlier, some of those fees are put off until they come in and pay for
The building
their plan.
permit, yeah.
Right.
So, some of that could still be coming in. It's just,
Yeah.
and for budget purposes, last night was the first reading of budget, so we've still got, 2 more readings?
Mm-hmm.
Before-
And the other thing, some of those fees, instead of paying it all at once, they'll spread it out over 3 years too. Also, so there's just different forms of payment.
But you say we can't predict what's going in, but can we predict what we use every year? You said 3 years worth, so I'm assuming that's like $60,000 a year. 60 or 70?
For the past, including 2019, for the past 5 years, the annual transfer to Parks Fund has been $50,000.
50,000.
The expenditures for tree purchases have been up and down.
Okay.
50,000, 40,000, 25,000, 19,000 this year, 15,000 next year.
So
We are caught up with tree replacement. So we do not need to buy as many new trees as we had.
That's correct.
well,
Because last year we officially replaced all the ash trees.
Yeah.
I mean, we're still replacing ash
You can have
trees,
that
not
if you
the
want to.
same high number as we were before.
the only point I was going to make, and I didn't want to get into another topic, but if you're going to increase your tree canopy, you're going to have to do more than replace street trees. You're going to have to invest in, I don't know, I hate to say it, private trees, backyard trees. Somebody's going to have to,
Parks and everything. Yeah.
cost share or something, so. But that's a different.
That's a different
yeah,
conversation.
Yeah,
but
it is.
Should the city be responsible for that? You know, I think the private homeowners
We should be,
But
I
that's
think,
a different discussion for a different day.
yeah,
yes.
yeah, I agree.
Okay, one question that I had,
Good one, though.
also along the budget, maybe Ted knows the answer. Allow me to quote one sentence from Monday's, last night's agenda. Regarding fees, the Building Industry Association, BIA, made a request of the city in 2017 to revisit the fee structure entirely. Now, the city has never admitted that, has never denied that either, that the BIA, has had a major impact within discussions. So my question is, and the fee structure was mentioned last night. So my question is, are you, Ted and Doug and others, are you aware of, are there any discussions going on right now about changing the fee structure as far as the Shade Tree Commission is concerned? Is it going to be still $100 per caliber inch replacement, or are there conversations underway to change that?
Nothing new. We're still looking at the same, keeping that fee schedule the same.
Okay. All right, good, I'm done.
Okay. I just want to look ahead to our meetings in January. We will not have a meeting in December. Our next meeting will be January. Somebody tell me the date.
Or is it February?
It's February.
Do we skip?
Well,
We're skip-
we had 2 meetings in a row.
This is technically, I think, the
is
December
our
meeting, right?
Oh, okay.
So I think
Okay,
we're
I thought I was
February.
saying that.
Now I will say, if we get a bunch of plans in between now and January, we may want to meet in January just to review those plans, just so we don't stack up too many plans, but we can't predict that yet.
At this point, like I said in previous times, that we still have the meeting time reserved, so you
Okay,
can just,
so
I
our
guess,
next,
keep your calendar open and we can play it by ear, but definitely will not be meeting in December. If that's
Correct.
agreeable to
Okay.
everybody.
so for sure, we're having a meeting on February 26th. And we still have a tentative meeting for January 22nd. Is what my,
Okay.
if we're going to do additional outreach and programs, and this is another topic that we've bantered around for several months, we need to start coming up with a plan of what we're going to do and how we're going to pull it off. So,
Yeah, right, and what topics.
Yeah.
And I have that as part of my notes, so to start the year, did we, I think Doug, we had a list of topics that we wanted to discuss.
Yes.
So maybe we could start kind of planning which ones are the most important. Now, we did talk about early in the year meeting at the greenhouse. So if we meet in February, maybe our March meeting would that be a good time to meet in the greenhouse?
Probably not till
Okay.
So it'll be February and April meetings.
Yeah, okay. But you're right, we need to start planning those outreach programs and what we want to accomplish in 2019.
well, I'm looking ahead. I'm thinking out loud, like, I guess, on the next agenda, the next meeting agenda. Should we have something additional to discuss and to make a plan or whatever. I don't know. I'm struggling here, how to pull this off, so.
Yes, we can, I think
Or maybe we need maybe we need a smaller group to make a plan.
And maybe we can accomplish a little bit through email where we look at the topics that are out there and
Okay.
maybe we can prioritize which topics are most important to the board at that point. And then maybe we can come up with ideas on, tackling the top 3 topics.
Okay. The other thing I'm going to ask for in February, or if we meet in January, is a person to be the point person for our YMCA and First Friday Arbor Day events. So be thinking about how you can all contribute. And that's all I have. Shannon?
Yes.
Never comment? Okay.
No.
Becky?
No.
Welcome back.
This is probably a little bit later, but I was wondering if we were still planning on doing the Arbor Day event with the high school.
We would love to do an Arbor event.
I actually, as I'm on the student council as well, and I like an AP Environmental Science, and I talked to both groups, and they both would love to be hands-on with that too. So I was
Okay.
wondering how we could get in connection
Yeah.
with each other.
Doug,
Yeah.
can you? You wanted, and I agree, we needed to include school group. I don't know if planting at the high school or planting at a different site, including high schoolers.
We'd have to just look at the options.
Okay, okay.
And you think the
I
students-
Say if there's anywhere to plan at the high school at this time.
Yeah.
Do you think the students want to be a part of the planning of what we do?
Yes.
Okay, well, we will visit that in January, with or without a meeting. We'll talk about it. I think that would be the best way to go. Anything else before we move into plan reviews? Okay.
Did you get this back?
Good, thank you. Yeah. Yeah. I'm sorry.
Nobody's jumping out. It's not on video. All by yourself.
It's the Blue Sky Car Wash, going to be down at Coughlin's Crossing. I do not believe that any of the trees that they are planting is in the right-of-way areas. So everything is inside of the right-of-way. I did not see any trees that I had any problems with that I thought were, if you've been to the Blue Sky Car Washes, they do a fantastic job with their landscapes around them and everything to make their buildings look attractive as possible. So.
Well, they don't have a lot of space for planting. I mean, get in and get out. So they wanted.
It's a clear building. That's what
Right,
it is.
Yeah. So it's all plant material with what green space there is?
There are some trees. There's some maples. Sugar maples, and then some dwarf Alberta spruce and some redbud. And then they're doing the grow low fragrance sumac.
But they're also getting some other trash collectors. That sounds great.
Is there a Blue Sky Car Wash farther down on 23? That's what I'm thinking of.
From Kroger.
Yeah, yeah,
It's a new
So
glass.
this is
Yeah.
They do a great
I
job.
don't even know what it says.
Coughlin's Crossing is Merrick.
Oh, yeah.
Merrick.
So 23 is here?
Yep.
Okay.
And this is the road that's going through the middle of the development, so this is
That
gonna
road would be over here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Gotcha. Yeah, that's pretty close then.
We are close to the other one.
Everybody okay?
it's always really busy.
So they were, so the developer's planting along Coughlin,
Yes, and that's all private.
so they don't have to worry about that. Okay.
Approved as presented.
Oh, speaking of that, I go in and out of the wild all the time now. And kind of the red buds are suffering. And it looks like they're one of the newer developed varieties that have that red color on the leaves. And I was shopping for red buds for my yard and the hardiness zones on most of those with that coloring is like 6 to 8.
You mean like forest pansy, the maroon, the
Yeah.
maroon leaf?
No, they're something heart, like a baby heart or something like that. It's a,
Some fancy culture.
yeah. But anyway, so
Well, how did you start? You started by saying you go in and out of what?
the Y.
The Y. Oh, okay.
Yeah, swimming.
And that's where they're.
And I saw some at the entryway. They kind of look like that same variety. They keep that color really late. They sell leaves on them. It seems like they're off-site. So we might want to start paying attention to the varieties of the red buds because there are some really cool ones out there that might not be okay for a while.
Yeah.
We've been on the red pansies, what I've been using at the cemetery, so
Okay. Yeah, there's a vine.
they've done the best of everything we had
Across
planted
from,
last year.
across from Willis. Willis is here. It's the funeral home site, I believe.
Yes, it is.
It's the old armory and funeral.
And Tim Hortons is over here.
No.
Oh, here. Okay. This is Willis, okay.
Yeah, right, yeah.
I did make changes on it. They have thornless hawthorn. Obviously, we don't plant hawthorn along the streets.
So Peter, sure.
And they also had the pears on there. There are 2 pears currently that are current on site. That's why they were trying to match up with what was already there. But I just assume they don't plant those. I think also your sight lines, honestly, I don't know if this tree should even be here anyway. So, but in keeping with making them replace trees and such, I guess since this is a stoplight here, you're not turning left until the light changes anyway. So I don't think a sight line is not that big of a deal right with that. So the changes would be New Horizon elm in place of the hawthorn and then tree lilac in front. There are not wires overhead. However, this corridor lacks any kind of color whatsoever. It is all maple tree and pear tree until you get downtown when it becomes crabapple trees. And one giant tree of heaven right beside Ross. I don't know, it's ginormous, so.
Everybody okay with this, with the changes?
Let me ask a question for clarification, because the project, the demolition of the building has not yet been approved by the Historic Preservation Commission, as City Council has not seen it yet. So what exactly are we approving? The landscaping, the trees, right? We're not approving the project, that's not our domain.
No.
So I want to be very clear on that. We're only limited to the vegetation there.
Oh, is that why they have the building in this big, this drawn so thick and not as detailed as it should be? Because they don't know.
This looks to me like the footprint of the existing building, because there's that little,
Yes, I think so, yes. because it is still standing. It's a beautiful
Yeah.
building, and there's going to be controversy about that. So, no, I don't want to take sides, I want to be clear that we're only approving or disapproving the landscaping. Okay.
Good question.
That's,
Okay.
yeah, that's correct. Changes are,
With your recommendations.
With the recommendations.
not recommendations, requirements.
Okay, requirements.
No kidding.
So I can't work from the bank anymore because someone's taking it over. I was so disappointed.
No, that's different building.
Why can't I?
Besides importance, I don't know.
Oh,
You can still park at that old bank.
Not sure.
No?
Well, you're talking about a different bank.
It's empty.
The one next to Jill.
Yeah.
Delaware County.
Yes,
That's
that's empty, yeah.
You park there.
Well,
It's private lot now.
Oh, okay.
no.
Oh,
Yeah, sign popped up. I don't really-
all right.
Because the Veterans Day parade, that was well sought after month.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, so, but,
This is
Maybe
the,
first Fridays.
the current River Street project that we're discussing. This is the initial tree survey. And then there's also a lot of undergrowth and brush and such in here also. So these were the trees that made the list of being large caliper sized trees. So that was the initial overlay of the property. River Street is here. This is the old railroad bed that is now the bike path. There's a paved alley that comes in behind here and then comes out to William Street. William Street is right in this area here. So that was the original properties with the trees that had made the list. This is the survey that was completed on the list. A lot of trees still staying. It's grouping through there. Obviously, this is where the main building is being built, so total caliper inches and then also the dead trees, which are dead and they do not need to replace those, obviously, that are on site. Anybody have any questions on that?
Well, and this is just the review of the tree removal. We're not approving any.
No, we are going
We
to
are
approve the
approving this.
plans, yes.
Okay.
But I'm showing
Oh,
you
yeah, oh,
the
okay.
tree
Okay, we're doing
survey
the
that was
tree
done.
survey, yeah.
This
Yeah.
is the tree survey that was completed.
What's the access to this site? Is it
River Street and the alley also here, but the main entrance is going to come off of River Street.
So this is not, River Street is to here at this point, right?
River Street goes all the way past
So
here.
it's still.
Yep. This is the bridge that goes across 23 and
Okay.
the river. And
Like one wrong turn and you're in the river.
I know.
So these are the plans, the planting plans, the trees they were using, and not a lot of diversity in their planting, kind of reminiscent of late 80s, early mid 80s. So,
Yeah.
but again, we can make recommendations on changing things if you wanted to. I have no trouble with the word Iataxis, but they're using a lot of them.
You think diversifying the shrub cover or the hedges might?
I think they're trying to go for a uniform look. I didn't count,
Okay.
but
A lot.
It looks like a lot.
the only trees really that we can have is the Shumard oaks that are going out along River Street. Because that's all that's in the right of way.
Is there a plan? This wasn't going to be a storage. This isn't storage units, right?
No.
This is going to be commercial, some sort of commercial?
Yes.
No, I don't see much in terms of tree preservation. I see little
This grouping
pockets of
here,
stands here and there, but not hundreds of caliber inches.
well, no, the trees that are on there are counted into the reservation. Either they've written a check for it, they're gonna write checks for it, or they're doing it with the caliper replacement. On this site,
There was talk about preserving, a significant number of trees, and I don't see that reflected on the map. I see a few isolated stands here and there.
Well, you know why? There's a lot of parking out there.
Yeah.
So most of those, a lot of those are
Yeah.
preserved.
Yeah, all right.
Some of those,
this large tree here,
And
this one here. And then this grouping down here, which would be these ones right here. And then this grouping down here also.
Yeah, this is where we really need this drip line ordinances.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just
Was
a
this
pavement, blood,
something
pavement,
reserved
you
to
know.
something?
Right in here.
Yeah.
That's those two right there.
Yeah.
So there's nothing. No.
Yeah, so that's another issue right there.
Oh, they're planting that. Okay.
Well, this one.
Oh,
It looks like a lot more coming
There's-
out than what it shows.
that,
151 caliber inches are going out, and 191, if memory serves, are being preserved. And hopefully that adds up
Well,
to
you can get
191.
100 caliber inches out of 3 big trees.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not.
Well,
It's not that
if you want, we can look up the numbers and we can
Oh,
go through it right now.
I don't want to delay things too much here.
This tree is number 37. 37 is a walnut tree that's 30-inch caliper tree.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
So you're
what I
gonna
was-
hit those numbers
Yeah.
occurring.
I don't know why they want to preserve a 30-inch walnut tree.
Yeah.
Which is
Because they
up.
want it right there next to that parking lot.
Well, I don't know, maybe it's not so
Is
close.
that this one?
Yeah, that's here.
Yeah,
Right.
okay.
Yeah, it's over.
So is there any, so these are homeowners here, right?
This is the homes along Williams Street.
So are they,
I have no idea whether or not, currently this is kind of soggy marsh right in this area. It's kind of not real pretty and
okay.
could use some,
Could use
made to
some
look
love.
better. If you would go out and look at the site that this is, you would say, oh, okay, yeah, that's going to be an improvement.
Yeah, I've seen
Okay.
it, yeah. The homeowners were mainly concerned about continuing access to the alley, because that's the way they enter the backs of their homes.
Oh, sure.
They were not worried about the development too much.
And it may even be more
Be
well
better with
maintained with the alley with the
Yeah, they get some Christmas trees and some lights.
any changes?
Approved, okay?
Do you want to take all of these? Yes.
No changes?
Here's one. Probably I'll use one.
Oh, what's happening there?
They are redoing a building.
Yeah, that's right.
Is this, Elaine, do you know, is this one for submittal? Because when I got this originally, it was for information, but it's for approval.
That's an updated one.
Yeah, it's for approval, right?
Oh, okay.
I took the informational thing off the agenda.
Oh,
That's.
Yes. We just got that the day before, the day she was gonna send the packet out.
okay. So currently the building is approximately right here that's currently there. they are going to build a new building. And this is the entrance straight across from Euclid, and
Okay.
that comes in. So they had already removed a tree that was on the corner of the building, and Mayor Riggle had pointed out to them that they couldn't just take down trees without. So we had done a site survey where I got out and looked at them. So they have now done their due diligence. I think it's like next
So that's the large grassy area right now,
Right.
right? Where people walk their dogs and stuff, and we,
Well-
we sit
Dog
sometimes.
walking area.
No, it's-
That over here.
That's way down that way,
That's
past.
along where, what, is that the rugby field?
This is the main entrance
Oh, okay, okay,
Yeah.
yes.
And this
to the
is
fairgrounds.
I see, okay, yeah, yeah. It's
The junior.
So this is
Right.
junior fair, this is
Junior
4-H,
fair.
the 4-H one.
okay, yeah.
Are they replacing that building? They're tearing down the old one, and putting up the new one?
A bigger,
Right.
a newer and bigger.
I see.
building.
Okay,
Yeah.
good, got it.
So on this plan, uh,
4-H is very popular. So is that gonna be done by next fair?
I
That's the
don't,
plan.
Yeah.
That's what,
Oh, that's exciting.
I don't think so anyways, yeah.
so these are trees they're maintaining and keeping without interfering with them. There's a small detention pond there. And there are some trees in this area here that are coming out. The one that was on the corner, and then there's a shag or a hickory on the backside corner here, if I remember correctly. So that is that plan. Again, it's past the right of way, so it's not really.
And is it county property rather than city property?
It is,
Part of it is city, and part of it is
Okay,
county.
yeah,
yeah,
like,
all right.
I think the
this is
front part
actually-
City, and the back part is county.
I see.
this
okay.
is actually an alley that is city
Okay.
right away.
Okay.
Okay,
Entrance.
Good.
And then, so these are trees that they're proposing to plant.
Yes.
Okay. So it looks like they're making, more than making up for what they take out.
Varieties on the next page, yeah.
So,
that's good.
Here's the bed tax.
The plants.
cranberry bush. Huh, that would be fun. Snack time. Mhm. Equals, which one? So a bunch of sugar maples, basically.
Yeah.
Why don't they plant hickories back in? Get some shagbarks back in there. Rip one out.
Oh, they're a little messy.
Yeah.
Any questions, comments, changes?
I have a question for the horticulture people here about sugar maples, because I know they're kind of tough to grow as seed, kind of challenging container. But are these, so I've seen some grafted, but do we know what these are?
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Do you know what those are?
What's that?
Buddy?
I don't know if there's a
Yeah.
grafted or not.
Oh, does it say straight?
Yeah.
species? Oh, we've probably seen that. Maybe somebody figured out how to grow sugar maple. That'd be awesome for nursery
They
trees.
just went, dug a few up.
All right.
I don't know, I mean.
That would be exciting.
They probably call it acorn. And then my other plan was.
nothing there.
Is that it?
That's it.
Actually, I accepted it to be held. Very exciting.
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, see you in February, maybe January.